Mohsin Zaidi grew up in a devout Muslim community in a deprived area of East London. Struggling with his sexuality, he felt isolated from his family, but found a love for education. He was the first person from his school to go to Oxford University. He went on to work at the UN, the UK's Supreme Court, and today is a criminal barrister in one of the country's top chambers, often working on high-profile cases. He's also an advocate of LGBT rights and BAME representation, and has a new book telling his story, A Dutiful Boy, a memoir of a gay Muslim's journey to acceptance, that is out in August. I'm pleased to say now that we are joined now by Mohsin himself. Really good to see you this morning, and handily a copy of the book just over your right shoulder there, Mohsin. Tell us just a little...
Yeah, I've been trained well by my publisher.
Tell us just a little bit about your story. It is one of struggle, yes. It clearly is one of struggle, but it's also one of achievement.
Yeah, I mean, more than struggle and achievement, I would say it is a story about hope and about love. More than anything, it's, I would say, the love letter to my family. When I was about 14 years old, I remember creeping down the stairs to watch Queer as Folk surreptitiously while everybody was asleep upstairs. And watching it, I just had this sense of unbelonging and something being not quite right. And I could see myself on the screen. And that sense of unbelonging kind of stayed with me as I went to university and realized that not everybody needed a student loan, or that I'd never heard of Eton and Harrow, for example, and people were surprised that I didn't know what they were. And so my response was, well, have you heard of Walthamstow Secondary School? And when they hadn't, I just thought they were the same. And then that sense of unbelonging then stayed with me again. I remember last year I was walking into a courtroom, into a magistrate's court, and one of the court staff mistook me for the defendant. So one of the reasons for writing the book was, I guess, to find a space for people like me to feel like, actually, we do belong. And so that kind of experience I had with Queer as Folk, where I saw myself, the hope is that the book will do that for younger people.
I know from a couple of friends just how significant the Russell T Davies drama was to them, in not just in identifying their own sexuality, but in the process of them coming out. I wonder how that is dealt with in the book, given that you grew up in such a devout religious family.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I know that the headlines always talk about the fact that my dad called a witch doctor to the house, but you know, that was, people think of that as a really nasty thing to have done, but it was an act of love, perhaps a misguided act, but an act of love. And ultimately, you know, my dad is one of my, and my mum are two of my biggest advocates today, and that's something that I'm so grateful for. And that was the other reason to write the book, was to say that there is more than one narrative. It doesn't just have to be about oppression of minorities.
Well, they must certainly have been instrumental in your push, your love of education, the drive that took you all the way from East London to an Oxford college to study law.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I would call it a love of education. I don't know how many people actually love education. But yeah, I mean, completely. You know, they were immigrants themselves, and we talk often about immigrants. Unfortunately, usually it's in a negative tone, but they have the really hard work ethic, and they knew that the only way that their children were going to make it out of the circumstance of, you know, being in a council house was education. And so I remember, like, when we were kids, if we wanted to go to the park, my mum and dad would say, you can go to the park, but first you have to do a comprehension exercise, or go and do your homework, or read something. And I resented it at the time. And unfortunately, I think so much, as with so much of life, you realise as you get older how right your parents were. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of this is thanks to them.
Well, I wonder then how you might have felt if you had been doing your A-levels in 2020. I don't know whether you had an unconditional or not from Oxford, whether you needed your grades, but if you needed grades to be booted out of school for several months and then ultimately to find your results downgraded because of the school that you went to, I wonder what your view might have been at that point.
You know, it's something like only 2.2% of kids from the from the most deprived backgrounds end up with the A-level grades to go to the top universities. You know, I'm appalled by the way that young people today have been treated, and unfortunately, it has disproportionately affected people from more deprived backgrounds. I mean, anecdotally, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, but I've heard that Eton, which I do now know, didn't have any of their grades downgraded. And this is not about Eton, it's just about the fact of fairness. And you've got young people who have worked so hard, who do come from really difficult backgrounds, who have done everything they possibly can, who are now being told, well, sorry, because of some formula, we've decided that your A star, which you would have got, we don't think you would have got.
Mohsin, I'm so sorry, we do have to leave it there, but it is an inspirational story entitled A Dutiful Boy, as I said, just carefully placed over your shoulder. Thank you for joining us.